My name is Mackenzie Mitchell, and at 28, I've built a successful freelance graphic design business in Boston, despite the shadows of my past. 3 years ago, my father vanished from my life without explanation, leaving only silence and questions. Yesterday, I found a letter in my mailbox with the familiar slant of his handwriting. My hands trembled as I held the worn envelope postmarked from Seattle, emotions colliding like storm waves. Hope, anxiety, anger. But something felt wrong. When I looked closer at that letter, what I discovered changed everything. Before I tell you what I found, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and subscribe to hear more stories about family secrets that shatter your world. My childhood memories begin like a highlight reel of picture-perfect moments. Dad, whose name is James Mitchell, was a brilliant marine biologist specializing in coral reef ecosystems. His eyes would light up like a child's on Christmas morning whenever he talked about his research. Mom, Eleanor, taught high school English with the same passion, but a much more consistent presence in my daily life. When Dad wasn't traveling for research expeditions, our family created the kind of memories that glow golden in retrospect. He taught me to swim in the frigid Atlantic off the Maine coast, his strong hands supporting me as I kicked and splashed. "The ocean is in our blood, Mac," he'd say, using his special nickname for me. Mitchell women are stronger than they look. We'd spend weekends exploring tide pools, Dad pointing out creatures most people would overlook. Tiny hermit crabs, nearly transparent shrimp, delicate sea stars. He'd bring his waterproof notebook, sketching creatures with remarkable detail. My mother would pack elaborate picnics, and we'd stay until the tide chased us away. Family game nights were sacred in our house. Mom's competitive Scrabble skills were legendary, while Dad excelled at strategy games. I can still hear his booming laugh when he'd inevitably win at Risk, conquering imaginary countries with the same enthusiasm he approached his real-world explorations. The changes were so gradual I barely noticed them at first. Around my 14th birthday, Dad started spending more time locked in his home office. His research trips grew longer, his returns briefer. He'd be physically present but mentally elsewhere, checking his phone constantly, stepping outside for calls he didn't want us to overhear. Mom noticed, too. Their whispered arguments floated up the stairs after they thought I was asleep. 3 missed parent-teacher conferences, James. She needs consistency. This grant could secure our future, Elle. You know how competitive funding is. It's always one more trip, one more paper, one more excuse. By sophomore year of high school, the tension had become a physical presence in our home, like a fourth family member we all pretended not to see. I'd come home to find Mom with reddened eyes, quickly composing herself when she heard the door. Dad started missing dinner more often than not, even when he wasn't traveling. The mysterious phone calls increased. Once, I overheard fragments that didn't make sense. "I can't access that kind of money right now." "No, she wouldn't understand. I'll figure something out." Mom grew increasingly suspicious. I discovered her one afternoon checking Dad's credit card statements, her face tight with worry. When she noticed me watching, she quickly shuffled the papers away. "Just organizing our tax documents," she said with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. I tried maintaining my relationship with both parents, walking an emotional tightrope. With Dad, I'd focus on marine biology, the one topic guaranteed to break through his distraction. With Mom, I pretended not to notice how she flinched whenever his name was mentioned. My high school graduation was the last time we were together as a complete family. The photographs show 3 people smiling, but I remember the stiffness in Dad's shoulders, how Mom kept a careful distance between them, and how I stood in the middle, physically and emotionally bridging the gap. Through my college years at Boston University, Dad's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He'd disappear for weeks, then suddenly show up at my dorm with expensive gifts and grand plans for father-daughter weekends that rarely materialized. I'd get midnight calls where he sounded disoriented, talking rapidly about research breakthroughs or new diving locations. Sometimes, in rare moments of clarity, he'd attempt reconciliation. "I know I've been absent, Mac. Things have been complicated, but I'm going to fix everything." These promises always dissolved like salt in water, leaving nothing tangible behind. By my senior year, I'd learned to manage my expectations. I stopped rearranging my schedule when he promised to visit. I started building my graphic design portfolio instead of waiting by the phone. The final explosion happened 3 years ago, shortly after my 25th birthday. Dad had been staying with me for a few days in my first post-college apartment, claiming he was between research assignments. I came home early from a client meeting to find him frantically searching through my desk drawers. "What are you doing?" I asked, dropping my portfolio case. He straightened, flushed with what I now recognize was shame disguised as anger. "I needed a pen. Why do you always question me like your mother?" What followed was an argument that had been brewing for years. I confronted him about his absences, the broken promises, the emotional toll on both Mom and me. His defenses crumbled into accusations. "You're just like your mother, always suffocating me," he shouted, words designed to cut deep. "Neither of you understand what it's like to have real passion for something bigger than your small lives." He stormed out. 3 days later, I received a text message. "Need space. Don't contact me." For months, I tried reaching out. Calls, emails, even a letter to his university department. All went unanswered. Eventually, his number was disconnected. His colleagues claimed he'd taken an extended sabbatical. His apartment was emptied, mail forwarded to an address no one would disclose. After a year of this emotional limbo, I made the difficult decision to stop searching. I focused on building my freelance graphic design business, specializing in branding for environmental organizations, a subconscious tribute to the father who had first kindled my love for nature. Therapy became my lifeline. Dr. Winters helped me understand that abandonment wasn't a reflection of my worth. Together, we unpacked the complicated emotions: grief for someone still alive, anger at unanswered questions, guilt over whether I could have done more. Gradually, I rebuilt my life. Last year, I purchased a small condo in Cambridge with a bay window perfect for my drawing table. I adopted Luna, a one-eyed rescue husky with trust issues that mirrored my own. We healed together, her willingness to love again teaching me that vulnerability wasn't always punished with abandonment. 6 months ago, I met Ethan at a charity auction for marine conservation. He was a wildlife photographer with kind eyes and infinite patience. Our relationship progressed cautiously, on my part at least. I revealed my father issues in small doses, testing whether this disclosure would drive him away. Instead, he listened without judgment, though I could tell he couldn't fully comprehend the magnitude of what I'd experienced. How could he? His family hosted weekly Sunday dinners where 3 generations gathered to argue politics and exchange affection in equal measure. Until yesterday, I thought I'd finally achieved equilibrium. Successful career, loving relationship, adorable if slightly neurotic dog. I believed I'd accepted my father's absence as a permanent condition, a scar that had finally healed over. Then the letter arrived, and everything changed. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon. I was working on logo concepts for an organic skincare line when Luna's excited barking announced the mail carrier. Typically, I'd ignore the interruption, but something, intuition perhaps, pulled me away from my drawing tablet. The stack of mail was unremarkable. Electricity bill, alumni magazine, takeout menu, and an envelope addressed in handwriting that stopped my heart. The blue ink, slightly slanted to the right, the way the M in Mitchell swooped dramatically at the first arch. I'd recognize my father's handwriting anywhere. I'd treasured every birthday card, every hastily scribbled note on my lunch bags throughout childhood. The postmark read Seattle, Washington, a city I'd never known him to have any connection to. My hands trembled so violently that Luna whined, pressing her warm body against my legs as I sank to the floor. For hours, I simply held the envelope, turning it over repeatedly, as if it might reveal its contents through osmosis. I canceled my afternoon client call, unable to trust my voice. The weight of that small paper rectangle felt impossibly heavy in my hands. At 5:37 p.m., I called Rachel, my best friend since freshman orientation. "It's been 3 years," I told her, my voice barely above a whisper. Why now? Rachel's voice was measured, cautious. You don't have to open it today. Or ever. That's your choice. But what if he's sick? What if he's dying? The questions that had lurked in my subconscious for years suddenly found voice. Then that's information you'll have to decide what to do with, she replied. But Mac, whatever you do, protect yourself. Remember how far you've come. After we hung up, I poured a generous glass of Cabernet and placed the envelope on my kitchen island. I ate dinner, a microwave meal I couldn't taste, while staring at it from across the room. Luna, sensing my distress, remained unusually subdued, her one blue eye watching me intently. At 9:23 p.m., liquid courage bolstering my resolve, I slid my finger under the flap and extracted 3 pages of the familiar cream-colored stationery Dad had always favored. Dear Mackenzie, it began. I know 3 years of silence deserves more explanation than I can provide in a letter. I've spent this time working on myself, addressing the demons that made me a poor father and husband. Not a day has passed that I haven't thought of you. The letter continued with apologies, vague explanations about needing space to sort through personal failures, and claims of growth and changed perspectives. He wrote about following my career from afar, expressing pride in my accomplishments. I'll be in Boston next month for a research conference, the letter concluded. I'm hoping you might be willing to meet. I understand if you refuse. I've forfeited any right to your time. But I'm hoping for a chance to begin making amends. You can reach me at this email or phone number if you're willing to see me. My emotions cycled rapidly. Hope that he'd finally recognized his failures, anger at the presumption that a single letter could bridge 3 years of silence, skepticism about the convenient timing, and beneath it all, the small voice of the daughter who still missed her father despite everything. I went to bed clutching the letter, but sleep eluded me. Dreams of childhood beaches morphed into nightmares of drowning, while a distant figure watched from shore. I woke at dawn, exhausted, but determined to examine the letter with more critical eyes. Morning light streaming through my kitchen window, I spread the pages before me. Reading it again, details began to catch my attention. He mentioned a beach trip to Cape Cod where he taught me to body surf. But that trip had been to Ogunquit Beach in Maine. We'd never vacationed on Cape Cod. Examining the handwriting more closely, I noticed subtle discrepancies. Dad's lowercase r had always had a distinctive curl, but these were more standard. The pressure points were wrong too. Dad pressed hard enough that you could feel the indentations on the back of the page, but these letters left barely a trace. The phrasing felt off, too formal in places, missing the marine biology metaphors Dad naturally incorporated into his communication. There was no mention of specific family jokes or references that only my father would know. Most damning was the signature. Dad always signed cards and letters to me as Dad, aka Captain James, a nod to our pretend ocean exploration games. This letter was simply signed James Mitchell with a flourish that didn't match any document I had from him. With growing certainty, I laid the letter beside the last birthday card I'd received from him 4 years earlier. The differences were subtle but unmistakable. This letter, despite its convincing first impression, was a forgery. The brief flicker of hope extinguished, replaced by confusion and a new wave of anger. Who would go to such lengths to impersonate my estranged father? And more importantly, why? My first instinct was to search for information about the contact details provided in the letter. The email address, jamesmitchell.marine@gmail.com, appeared legitimate at first glance, incorporating my father's name and profession. A quick search revealed it had been created only a month ago. The phone number yielded more concrete information. An online search identified it as a prepaid cell phone activated in the Seattle area. No social media accounts were linked to either the email or phone number. With shaking hands, I dialed my mother's number. She had remarried 2 years ago to Greg, a kind orthodontist who collected vintage vinyl records and made her laugh in a way I hadn't heard since my childhood. Their relationship had given me hope that emotional healing was possible. "Mom, I got a letter from Dad," I said without preamble. when she answered. Her sharp intake of breath was followed by a long silence. What did it say? She finally asked, her voice carefully neutral. I summarized the contents, my suspicions growing as I spoke the words aloud. Something feels wrong about it. The details aren't quite right. Oh, Mackenzie. Her voice softened with concern. I received a similar letter about 6 months ago. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to reopen old wounds. My grip tightened on the phone. What happened? The letter was followed by an email claiming he was in financial trouble. Needed money for medical bills. I ignored it, assumed it was a scam. She paused. I never thought they'd target you too. The confirmation both relieved and devastated me. The letter wasn't from my father, which meant he hadn't suddenly decided to re-enter my life, but it also meant he hadn't reached out at all. I was still abandoned, still without answers. Have you heard anything real about him? I asked, hating the hopeful tremor in my voice. Nothing since he left, honey. I'm sorry. After hanging up, I stared at the letter with renewed determination. If someone was impersonating my father, I needed to know why. It felt like a violation of not just my privacy but my memories, the few good ones I still cherished. The next day, I contacted Dr. Meredith Walsh at the Oceanographic Institute where my father had last worked. She'd been his research partner on several projects, and I remembered her visiting our home for dinner occasionally during my teenage years. Mackenzie! What a surprise! She greeted me warmly. Her enthusiasm faded as I explained the situation. I wish I had better information for you. James left the institute rather abruptly about 3.5 years ago. Was he fired? I asked directly. Her hesitation told me everything. There were concerns about erratic behavior, missed deadlines, unexplained absences. The final straw was when research funds couldn't be properly accounted for. You think he took money? The idea made me sick. Nothing was ever proven. There were rumors about gambling debts, maybe substance issues, but I never saw direct evidence. She paused. The last time we spoke, he mentioned going west to start fresh. That's all I know. The conversation left me with more questions than answers. Dad had been fired, facing potential financial and personal problems right before his disappearance from my life. It painted a picture far different from the passionate researcher I'd idolized as a child. That evening, after much deliberation, I contacted a private investigator. Marcus Jenkins had been recommended by a lawyer friend as discreet and thorough. His office was small but immaculate, with diplomas and licenses prominently displayed. I placed the letter on his desk. I need to know who sent this. Marcus examined it carefully, asking pointed questions about my father's disappearance and our last interactions. His expression remained professionally neutral as I shared the painful details. Classic manipulation tactics in the letter, he noted. Vague explanations, emotional appeals, sense of urgency with the upcoming visit, creates pressure to respond quickly without fully processing. We developed a 3-pronged plan. Digital footprint search for my father, professional handwriting analysis of the letter, and investigation of the Seattle connection. I wrote Marcus, a check that made my bank account wince. But I needed answers more than financial security at that moment. 3 days later, Marcus called with preliminary findings. The handwriting analysis confirmed my suspicions. The letter was a sophisticated forgery, mimicking the general style but missing subtle personal characteristics. The email was accessed from a public library computer in Seattle, he added. Not much to trace there, but I'm still working on other angles. As the investigation continued, I became increasingly obsessed with finding answers. I missed design deadlines, canceled plans with Ethan, and spent hours searching online for any trace of James Mitchell. Luna was my only consistent companion, curled beside me during late nights of research. Ethan's concern grew with each rain check and distracted conversation. 2 weeks after receiving the letter, he confronted me at my apartment. You're not sleeping. You've lost weight. This investigation is consuming you, he said, gesturing to the wall where I'd taped up notes and printouts. I'm worried about you, Mac. I need to know what happened to him, I insisted. Wouldn't you want answers? Yes, but not at the expense of my present life, he countered. You're chasing ghosts instead of living your life. You don't understand. Your family has Sunday dinners and holiday traditions. You've never had someone just disappear. His expression hardened. You're right. I can't understand exactly what you're going through. But I do understand obsession, and I'm watching it destroy the woman I've fallen in love with. The declaration of love, our first, landed in the middle of an argument, robbing both of us of proper response. We stared at each other, the moment splintering as my phone rang. It was Marcus. I need to take this, I said, reaching for the phone. Ethan shook his head sadly. No, you need to decide what's more important, solving the mystery of your past or building your future. He walked to the door. Call me when you figure it out. The door closed quietly behind him as I answered Marcus's call, tears blurring my vision. I had just traded my first promising relationship in years for the chance at answers I wasn't sure existed. I've got something, Marcus said, unaware of the emotional scene he'd interrupted. But it's not what you expected. The prepaid phone wasn't activated in Seattle, Marcus explained. It was purchased and registered in a small town called Riverdale, Oregon. I found similar scam patterns in 3 other cases in the Pacific Northwest. What kind of scam? I asked, pacing my living room, while Luna watched with concern. Family impersonation. The scammer targets estranged family members, usually identified through obituaries, social media, or public records. They gather enough personal information to seem legitimate, then establish contact. Eventually, they request money, usually with a sob story about medical bills or legal troubles. But how would someone know about my father's disappearance? Or have access to his handwriting style? That's what I'm still investigating. But I did find a police report from Riverdale mentioning a suspected scammer named Timothy Bryant. He has a record for similar fraud schemes and identity theft. I Googled the name immediately. Timothy Bryant's mugshot showed a man in his 40s with thinning hair and calculating eyes. Nothing about him suggested any connection to my father or our family. How would he know personal details about us? I wondered aloud. Social engineering, Marcus explained. People share incredible amounts of information publicly without realizing it. Obituaries mention family relationships. Social media posts reference childhood memories. Public records show property ownership. A skilled scammer pieces together enough to seem convincing. The violation of having my family history mined for a scam made my skin crawl. But a plan was forming in my mind. What if we set a trap? I suggested. I'll respond to the email with information that seems personal but is actually false. If he uses those details in future communications, we'll have confirmation. Marcus approved of the strategy. Together, we crafted a careful email response. I expressed cautious interest in meeting, mentioned a fictional family cabin in Vermont where we could potentially meet, we'd never owned property there, and casually referenced an inheritance from my grandmother that was being finalized. She had left me only a collection of vintage teacups. Now we wait, Marcus said after I hit send. The response came within hours. Too eager, too quick. Mackenzie, I can't tell you how much your email means to me, the message began. The Vermont cabin would be perfect for our reunion. So many memories there. The confirmation of the scam brought a strange combination of relief and renewed grief. This wasn't my father reaching out, which validated my suspicions. But it also meant my father remained truly gone, without explanation or closure. 2 days later, a second email arrived with an escalation. I hate to bring this up when we're just reconnecting, but I've been facing some medical challenges. Nothing life-threatening, but the bills have been overwhelming. I'm hoping to get back on my feet before our meeting. Is there any chance you could help with a loan of $5,000? I promise I'll repay it when we meet. I forwarded both emails to Marcus and the local police department, providing all the evidence of the scam. While part of me felt vindicated in uncovering the truth, another part mourned the brief hope I'd allowed myself to feel when that letter first arrived. That evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset with Luna pressed against my side, my phone rang. It was Marcus. I found something you need to know, he said, his voice unusually gentle. While investigating Timothy Bryant, I came across an obituary from Portland, Oregon. It's for a James Mitchell, age 62, who died of a heart attack in a homeless shelter last year. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. That's a common name, I managed to say. The obituary mentioned he was formerly a marine biologist from Massachusetts. There was a photo, Mackenzie. I'm sending it to you now. My phone pinged with the incoming image. With trembling fingers, I opened the attachment. The photo showed an older, weathered version of my father. His hair had gone completely gray, his face gaunt with deep lines around his eyes, but it was unmistakably him. The room spun around me as I struggled to breathe. Mackenzie? Are you there? Marcus's voice seemed to come from far away. Luna's cold nose against my cheek brought me back to the present. I was on the floor, my back against the wall, tears streaming down my face. He's been dead for a year, I whispered. While I was angry at him for not contacting me, he was already gone. I'm sorry, Marcus said, the words insufficient but sincere. After ending the call, I sat in stunned silence as Luna pressed her warm body against mine, occasionally licking the tears from my face. The father I'd been searching for, the answers I'd been seeking, all permanently beyond reach. The finality crushed me with a grief far different from the ambiguous loss I'd been carrying for 3 years. I called my mother, barely able to form coherent sentences as I shared the devastating news. Her gasp of shock transformed into quiet sobs. I always thought someday he'd get help, come back, she whispered. Even after everything, I never wanted this. We cried together, mourning not just the man who had died alone in a shelter, but also the father and husband he had once been, and all the possibilities for reconciliation that had died with him. Despite concerns from both my mother and messages from Ethan, which I briefly responded to with the news, I booked a flight to Portland 3 days later. I needed to see where my father had spent his final days, to make tangible the reality I was struggling to accept. The homeless shelter was located in downtown Portland, a practical but worn building with a hand-painted sign reading Harbor Light Community Center. I'd called ahead, explaining my situation, and was greeted by Sandra, the shelter manager. In her 50s with prematurely gray hair and kind eyes, she had the efficient manner of someone who dealt with crisis daily but hadn't lost her compassion. James stayed with us on and off for about 2 years, she explained, as she led me to her small office. He was quiet, kept to himself, but always kind. Helped with dishes without being asked. Fixed our plumbing once when we couldn't afford a proper plumber. The image of my brilliant father washing dishes in a homeless shelter was difficult to reconcile with the man who had once presented research at international conferences. Do you know what happened to him? How he ended up here? I asked, my voice barely steady. Pieces, mostly. He didn't talk much about his past, especially at first. From what I gathered, he'd lost his job, had some gambling problems that got out of hand. Mentioned moving west to escape creditors. She paused. The alcohol was an issue when he first arrived, but he'd been sober for months before. She trailed off delicately. Before he died, I finished for her. Sandra nodded. He had been doing better. Found some day labor work at the docks. Was saving for an apartment deposit. She opened a drawer in her desk. We keep personal effects when possible, in case family comes looking. Most never do. She placed a small cardboard box on the desk. These were James's possessions. With trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside was a worn leather wallet containing a faded photo of me at my high school graduation, a library card, and $23. Beneath the wallet was a weathered journal and a few photographs, including one of me as a child, building a sandcastle. I opened the journal, recognizing my father's actual handwriting immediately. The entries documented his descent after leaving our family, the loss of his job, mounting gambling debts that had spiraled out of control, depression that he self-medicated with alcohol. He described moving west to escape loan sharks, his academic credentials becoming worthless as his reputation crumbled and references refused to vouch for him. The most devastating entry was dated about a year after he left. Drafted another letter to Mackenzie today. Can't bring myself to send it. What would I say? That her father is a jobless drunk sleeping on a park bench? That I've failed at everything I once prided myself on? She deserves better than me in her life. Better no father than one who would only bring her shame. My tears fell onto the page as I continued reading. Later entries showed small improvements, getting into the shelter program, finding odd jobs, attending AA meetings. The final pages documented his attempts at stability, his hope to eventually reach out when I'm worthy of being her father again. The last entry was dated just 3 days before his death. Library computer working again. Looked up Mackenzie online today. Found article about her designing logo for Marine Conservation Project. Following in my footsteps in her own way. Prouder than I have any right to be. I closed the journal, overwhelmed. He knew about my work? Sandra nodded. He mentioned his daughter, the marine biologist, a few times. Very proud. I'm a graphic designer, I said softly. I work with environmental organizations, but I'm not a scientist. Understanding dawned on Sandra's face. There was a news article he printed, kept it in his locker, about a Mackenzie Mitchell who designed something for a marine project. That's me, I confirmed. But I'm not a biologist like he was. He might have misunderstood. Or maybe he saw what he hoped to see, Sandra suggested gently. He talked about you working to save the oceans, following his path. The misunderstanding was heartbreaking in its poignancy. My father, in his final days, believing I had followed his scientific footsteps, rather than forging my own creative path. Where is he buried? I asked, clutching the journal to my chest. Sandra drove me to the cemetery herself. My father's grave was marked with only a simple plaque in the public section. No epitaph, no mention of his achievements or family. I sat beside it for hours, reading his journal cover to cover as the sun traversed the sky. In those pages, I found a different man than the father I'd known or the monster I'd sometimes imagined during his absence. I found someone deeply flawed, struggling with addiction and shame, yet never stopping loving his daughter even when he felt unworthy of her love in return. As dusk fell, my phone rang. Marcus calling with an update. Timothy Bryant was arrested this morning, attempting a similar scheme in Seattle, he informed me. When confronted with evidence, including your case, he confessed to multiple family impersonation scams. How did he choose his targets? I asked, still sitting beside my father's grave. Mostly obituaries. He looked for deaths where family members were mentioned but lived in different cities. Then he'd research them online, gathering details to make his impersonation convincing. But my father wasn't publicly reported dead, I pointed out. Bryant worked as a janitor at the Harbor Light Shelter for 3 months last year, Marcus explained. He likely had access to your father's possessions, perhaps even that journal, before they were properly stored. When he saw the potential, he moved to Seattle to distance himself from the connection. The violation felt complete now. This stranger had not only stolen my father's identity, but had likely read his private thoughts, mining our family's pain for profit. Yet somehow, I couldn't summon fresh anger. I was emotionally depleted, sitting beside the grave of a father I would never reconcile with, holding his final thoughts in my hands. Thank you for everything, Marcus, I said. I think I have all the answers I'm going to get. As night fell over the cemetery, I faced the hardest truth of all. I would never have the reunion or reconciliation I had secretly hoped for all these years. The father I remembered, the father I resented, and the broken man documented in the journal, all were gone forever, leaving me to make peace with an incomplete relationship and unanswered questions. The flight back to Boston gave me 5 uninterrupted hours to reflect on everything I'd discovered. Luna was staying with Rachel, my apartment empty and waiting. As the plane cruised at 30,000 feet, I read through my father's journal again, tracing his descent with greater compassion than I'd been capable of before seeing his final resting place. My emotions remained complex and seemingly contradictory. Grief for the father I'd lost, anger at his choices, pity for his struggles, and surprisingly, a sense of relief. The uncertainty that had hung over me for years was gone. I was no longer subconsciously waiting for his return or fearing another abandonment. The situation, painful as it was finally defined. Landing in Boston felt like returning as a different person than the one who had departed 3 days earlier. My apartment seemed both familiar and strange, as if the space itself recognized the transformation in its owner. I set my father's journal prominently on my bookshelf rather than hiding it away, acknowledging his presence in my life rather than denying it. A text notification lit up my phone. Heard you're back. Call when you're ready. No pressure. Ethan. His message reminded me how thoroughly I'd pushed people away while focused on unraveling my father's disappearance. I hadn't just distanced myself from Ethan. I'd kept Rachel at arm's length, canceled plans with other friends, and even neglected regular calls with my mother, speaking of whom, I needed to check in. I dialed her number, steeling myself for a difficult conversation. I went to Portland, I said when she answered. I saw where he's buried. Oh, Mackenzie. Her voice cracked slightly. How are you holding up? I'm still processing everything, I admitted. But I found his journal. He wrote about us, about what happened after he left. Did it help? Having those answers? Yes and no, I said thoughtfully. It explains some things, but it doesn't erase what happened. He made choices that hurt us both deeply, Mom. Understanding why doesn't completely take away the pain. Forgiveness isn't for him anymore, she said after a thoughtful pause. It's for you. Carrying anger toward him only hurts you now. When did you get so wise? I asked, attempting lightness despite the tears in my voice. Around the time I stopped defining myself by his abandonment and started building the life I actually wanted, she replied. It's your turn now, sweetheart. After our call, I drove to Rachel's apartment to collect Luna. My friend opened the door with concerned eyes, clearly prepared for another breakdown. Instead, I hugged her tightly. Thank you for taking care of Luna, and for trying to take care of me, even when I was pushing everyone away. Luna bounded over, her entire body wiggling with excitement at our reunion. As Rachel made tea, I recounted everything I'd discovered in Portland. You know, Rachel said carefully, I've noticed something about you since your dad first disappeared. What's that? You've kept everyone at a distance, even me sometimes, and we've been friends for 10 years. It's like you've been waiting for everyone else to leave too. Her observation struck with uncomfortable precision. I guess I have been waiting for the other shoe to drop, I acknowledged. If I don't let people get too close, it won't hurt as much when they go. Except that strategy guarantees you never experience real connection either, Rachel pointed out. Look at what happened with Ethan. At the mention of his name, shame washed over me. I really messed that up, didn't I? He cares about you, Mac. He was here yesterday asking if I'd heard from you, worried sick about your trip. On the drive home with Luna, I composed a text to Ethan. Back from Portland, found answers I needed. Can we talk tomorrow? Coffee at Groundwork at 10? His response came almost immediately. I'll be there. The next morning, I arrived at our favorite coffee shop early, securing the quiet corner table we preferred. When Ethan walked in, the tightness in my chest both intensified and somehow eased at the same time. He looked tired, his usual neatly styled hair slightly disheveled, suggesting he'd run his hands through it repeatedly, a nervous habit I'd come to recognize. Thank you for coming, I said as he sat down. I was worried about you, he replied simply. Did you find what you were looking for in Portland? I told him everything. About the shelter, my father's final days, the journal, and the scammer who had exploited our estrangement. He listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving mine. I'm sorry I shut you out, I concluded. I've been so afraid of being abandoned again that I've kept emotional walls up with everyone. Including you. I shouldn't have given you an ultimatum when you were already struggling, he countered. That wasn't fair. You were right, though. I was obsessed with solving the mystery of my past instead of building my future. I took a deep breath. I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want to keep everyone at arm's length because I'm afraid they'll leave. What do you want, Mac? He asked gently. To try again. To be more open, more present. To stop expecting you to disappear at the first sign of conflict. I reached across the table, offering my hand. I can't promise I'm completely healed, but I'm working on it. His fingers interlaced with mine. That's all anyone can ask. Returning to work the following week, I found an email waiting from a potential new client, the Pacific Northwest Marine Conservation Initiative. They needed branding for their new educational campaign. The coincidence felt meaningful, a chance to honor my father's original passion while applying my own talents. As I sketched concepts, I found myself incorporating subtle elements from my father's research. The specific pattern of coral polyps he had studied, the wave formations he had documented in his field notes. The design process became unexpectedly therapeutic, a way of channeling grief into creation. I think I'd like to do something more with this, I told my therapist during our next session. Maybe establish a small scholarship for oceanography students in his name. That sounds like a beautiful tribute, she encouraged. Finding ways to honor the good parts of his legacy while acknowledging the full, complicated truth. Over the next few weeks, I created a memorial website featuring my father's early research contributions. I contacted former colleagues who shared papers and photographs I'd never seen. Gradually, I built a more complete picture of James Mitchell. Not just my father who had abandoned us, but also the passionate scientist who had made genuine contributions to marine conservation. The experience taught me that relationships aren't all or nothing propositions. I could acknowledge my father's brilliance and the love he had shown me as a child while still recognizing his profound failures as a parent. I could keep the memories that sustained me without denying the pain he had caused. This nuanced perspective extended to my other relationships as well. I found myself more able to accept Ethan's occasional need for solitude without interpreting it as rejection. I could disagree with my mother without fearing it would damage our relationship. I was learning, slowly but surely, that love could withstand imperfection. 6 months after discovering my father's fate, my life had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Ethan and I decided to move in together, combining our living spaces in a new apartment with large windows and a small garden patio where Luna could sunbathe. My father's journal occupied a prominent place on our shared bookshelf, no longer hidden away like a shameful secret. "Are you sure you want this displayed?" Ethan had asked as we unpacked. "It brings up painful memories." "It's part of my story," I explained. "Hiding it doesn't change that." My therapy sessions shifted from processing abandonment to building healthy attachment patterns. Dr. Winters noted my progress with quiet approval. "You're not defining yourself by his absence anymore," she observed during one session. "You're creating your own narrative." The Marine Conservation Organization had become a regular client, impressed with the emotional depth of my designs. This connection led to other environmental projects, creating a niche specialty that felt meaningful beyond the paycheck. With each design that helped protect the oceans my father had loved, I felt a sense of carrying forward what was valuable in his legacy while forging my own path. The scholarship fund I established in his name was modest but meaningful. Working with his former university department, we created criteria emphasizing both academic excellence and financial need. When the first recipient was selected, a young woman studying coral reef degradation, I felt a bittersweet satisfaction. One weekend, I visited my mother and Greg for Thanksgiving. To my surprise, she brought out a box of old photos during dessert, including many of my father from their early years together. "I thought you might want these," she said, passing me an album. It felt wrong to keep them hidden away. The photos showed a younger, happier version of my parents. My father with his arm around my mother's waist as they stood on a research vessel, both squinting into the Sunday. Another captured him holding me as an infant, his expression a mixture of terror and absolute devotion. "He wasn't always the man he became," Mom said softly. "I've made my peace with that. There were good years before the difficult ones." Her generosity in sharing these memories without bitterness helped me see both my parents as complex humans rather than perfect mother divided by villain father archetypes. It was a more mature understanding. People could be loving and flawed, strong and vulnerable, all at once. That night, back at my mother's house, I found myself examining old family photos with new eyes. The man smiling back from those images was neither the superhero of my childhood memories nor the monster of my angry adolescence. He was simply human, brilliant, passionate, deeply flawed, ultimately broken by his own demons. Over dinner with Rachel the following week, she commented on the change she'd observed in me. You seem lighter somehow, she noted, as we shared pasta at our favorite Italian restaurant. Less like you're bracing for disaster. I guess I've realized that knowing the full truth about my father, as painful as it is better than the uncertainty I lived with for years, I replied. And it's helped me understand that not everyone leaves. Some people stay. My professional life flourished alongside my personal growth. The marine conservation work led to more environmental clients, creating a purpose-driven portfolio that felt meaningful. Luna adapted beautifully to living with Ethan and his cat Milo, the unlikely animal friendship mirroring our own blended life. On the anniversary of discovering my father's fate, Ethan suggested a weekend trip to the Maine coast where I'd spent childhood vacations. The beach looked smaller than I remembered, the water no less frigid despite the summer Sunday. This is where he taught me to swim, I told Ethan, pointing to a protected cove. He said Mitchell women were stronger than they looked. He was right about that, Ethan replied, squeezing my hand. As waves lapped at the shore, I felt an unexpected surge of emotion. Finding a private moment while Ethan photographed seabirds, I stood at the water's edge and spoke aloud to my father for the first time since learning of his death. I wish things had been different, I said to the ocean he had loved. I wish you'd found the help you needed. I wish you'd known that I would have accepted you, even broken. But I understand now that your leaving wasn't about my worth. It was about your pain. The words of forgiveness, spoken to the waves that would never carry them to him, nonetheless lifted a weight I'd carried for years. The formal act of release wasn't for him. He was beyond needing or receiving it. It was for me. When I returned to Ethan, he noticed the shift immediately. You okay? Better than okay, I replied. I just realized I don't need to carry all this anymore. That evening, sitting on our hotel balcony as the sun set over the Atlantic, Ethan broached a subject we'd danced around before. Have you thought about our future? Long term, I mean. More and more lately, I admitted. Why? I was wondering how you feel about family. Your own family someday, I mean. The question would have terrified me a year ago, triggering fears that I'd inherited my father's capacity for abandonment. Now, I considered it thoughtfully. I used to worry that I'd disappear like he did, I confessed. That whatever broke in him might be lurking in me, too. What do you think now? I think I'm not my father, I said with quiet confidence. I've faced the truth about him, and that's given me the freedom to write my own story. And yes, I think about our future a lot. A family with you someday. It doesn't scare me anymore. It feels like possibility. Back in Boston, I completed a personal project I'd been working on for months. A memorial artwork incorporating scanned pages from my father's journal alongside my own handwriting. The intertwined text created a visual representation of how his story had shaped mine without defining it. The piece helped me articulate something I'd been gradually understanding. We're all influenced by both presence and absence in our lives. My father's abandonment had shaped me as surely as his early love and encouragement had. The difference now was that I could acknowledge both influences without being controlled by either. 1 year after the arrival of that fateful forged letter, I hosted a small memorial gathering at the apartment Ethan and I now shared. It wasn't a traditional memorial service. My father had been gone for 2 years by then, but a commemoration of my journey to understanding and acceptance. Rachel came, of course, bringing inappropriate humor and genuine support in equal measure. Dr. Meredith Walsh traveled from Massachusetts to share stories about my father's scientific contributions that I'd never heard. To my surprise, my mother attended briefly, her presence a testament to her own healing journey. Your father would have been proud of this, Dr. Walsh told me, gesturing to the display of his research alongside announcements about the scholarship fund. You've honored his work while creating something meaningful from a painful situation. I've tried to separate the scientist from the man who left, I explained. He made valuable contributions that deserve recognition, despite his personal failings. The young scholarship recipient, Zoe, attended as well, eager to discuss her research plans. I never met your father, but studying his early papers on coral polyp regeneration gave me the idea for my thesis, she enthused. Explaining my father to someone who had never known him personally proved surprisingly liberating. Instead of navigating my own complicated emotions, I could share a balanced truth. He was a brilliant researcher with innovative approaches to marine conservation. He also struggled with personal demons that ultimately overwhelmed him. Both realities existed simultaneously. As guests mingled, I noticed remarkable changes in my own behavior. A year ago, I would have been checking my phone constantly, anxious about missed connections or potential abandonment. Now, I moved comfortably through conversations, fully present rather than preparing for disappointment. Later that evening, after everyone had left, I had my final therapy session specifically focused on father issues. Dr. Winters had supported me through the darkest periods of uncertainty and grief. When you first came to me after your father disappeared, you were defined by his absence, she observed. Now you've incorporated that loss into your larger story without being consumed by it. I still have bad days, I admitted. Times when I wish things had been different. Grief and healing aren't destinations, Mackenzie. They're ongoing processes. Peace doesn't come from perfect resolution. It comes from acceptance of what is, even when it's painful. That night, I sat on our balcony with my father's journal, thumbing through pages I'd read countless times. The difference now was that I could read his words without feeling the sharp pain that had initially accompanied them. I could recognize his struggles without taking responsibility for them. I could miss the father he had been while acknowledging the reality of who he became. Unexpectedly, a letter arrived the following week, from Timothy Bryant, writing from prison where he was serving time for multiple fraud convictions. Unlike the forged letter that had started this journey, this one was unquestionably genuine in its awkward remorse. I never considered the real people affected by my scams, he wrote. Seeing the lengths you went to in finding the truth about your father made me realize the pain I've caused many families. I know an apology doesn't fix anything, but I am truly sorry. The parallel wasn't lost on me. Here was an opportunity to forgive someone who had deeply violated my trust and exploited my pain. After consideration, I wrote a brief response expressing my forgiveness. Not because he deserved it, but because I refused to carry the weight of resentment any longer. As summer arrived, Ethan, Luna, and I spent a weekend at the beach where my father had first taught me to swim. Watching the sunset over the water that had been so central to his identity, I felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, his arm around my shoulders. "That carrying someone's memory doesn't require carrying their pain," I replied. For years, I thought honoring my father meant either idealizing him or rejecting him completely. Now I understand that the truth lies somewhere in between. The past shapes us, but doesn't define us. Every family story contains chapters of joy and sorrow, connection and loss. Finding meaning requires embracing the full narrative, not just the happy moments or the painful ones. I am my father's daughter in all the ways that matter. Curious, passionate, resilient, I told Ethan, as the last light faded from the horizon. The rest of the story is mine to write. Have you ever discovered unexpected truths about someone you thought you knew? How did it change your perspective? Share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family secrets, healing, and finding your own path. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, our past shapes us, but our future belongs to us alone.